Okay, let's use today as a chance to go through the organization of the human body. And I've divided the content on this particular chapter into two sections. We're going to start by looking at the overview of the anatomy and physiology, then talk a little bit about the levels of structural organization, followed by looking at the principal organ systems. All other parts of this chapter we will cover in the second lecture video. So let's start by discussing a little bit about the relationship between anatomy and physiology, and also see how the term pathology relates to that. So anatomy is really all about the study of the structures or form of the body. So we're looking at things like what parts make up a structure, their sizes, and their relationships between each other. We can look at anatomy on a few different levels. This includes gross anatomy, where we look at a study of macroscopic structures. So this could include, for example, surface, systemic, regional, and surgical anatomy. So we're really looking at large and easily observable structures. Microscopic anatomy instead looks at the study of microscopic structures. This includes cytology, so studying the cell structures, and histology, which is all about studying tissues. So microscopic anatomy focuses on structures that are too small to be seen with a naked eye. So we're going to need a microscope to assist us in this work. There are also other types of anatomy. For example, developmental anatomy is something that I've spent a lot of time working on. So that's just something to keep on mind as well. So let's talk a little bit about the physiology. Physiology is all about the study of the function. So we're seeing things like how things work, what action they produce, and so on. Obviously, there is a connection between the two, so anatomy and physiology are very much interrelated. I think a good example would be alveoli, the smallest structures in our respiratory tree. These are very thin-walled structures, and this thin wall of the alveoli facilitates the gas exchange across this membrane. So there is a connection between the anatomy and physiology of the alveoli, as we're seeing there. Finally, let's consider pathology. So pathology is the study of anatomy and physiology as it changes in relation to a disease. So often it's important for us first to define the anatomy and physiology of a normal structure before we can start working out the pathology that's related with this. I realize that in the field where most of you are heading, you probably are not going to see a lot of the normal anatomy and physiology. It's the pathological stages that you'll be seeing, but we're going to start by focusing on normal anatomy and physiology. So I think that brings us to our second big learning goal of this chapter. And I want to spend a little bit of time looking at levels of organization. So anatomy and physiology can be studied at all different scales. And actually, I think that what we're seeing here on this slide could be expanded far further. We could go even in a larger scale. We could look at things like ecosystems, biosphere, so the Earth as a whole, and so on, if we wanted to go to those fields of biology. But we're going to stick to these levels that we're seeing on the screen for our purposes of anatomy and physiology. So let's start with the level of chemical level of life. So chemistry of life is an expression that I hear being used a lot. So all things are made of atoms. So there's a chemical basis for everything that we'll be looking at. And atoms are the smallest part of a substance that can be broken down further chemically. So or that cannot be broken down further chemically. So atom is as small as we can go with the typical chemical means that we have. There are, of course, actually also subatomic particles such as protons, neutrons, and electrons, but to be able to access those and study those, we would need to move beyond the chemical means that we're looking at for our purposes. So that's our atoms. Now let's have a look at molecules. When we have two or more atoms coming together, they can form molecules, and molecules are typically characterized by chemical bonds that we see between those. So we can have covalent bonds where atoms share electrons, ionic bonds where the positives and negatives attract each other, or even hydrogen bonds. That's kind of a common one because water is so crucial for life. So what we're seeing on the slide on the right hand side is that we had one oxygen and two hydrogen atoms, and they formed together a water molecule. So I hope that that helps to clarify the relationship between atoms and molecules. Moving forward to the next level of study of life, we find ourselves looking at cells. So cells are really the smallest independently living things, if you wish to describe them. Some cells do need other cells, but it is possible to have single-celled organisms. So these organisms are perfectly self-sufficient. They do not need other sources. Obviously, we could study different parts of the cells: nucleus, mitochondria, smooth and rough, ER, Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, centrosomes, cytoplasm, plasma lipid bilayer, plasma membrane, and so on and so on. So that's the cellular level that we can see as we're moving to bigger and bigger scale from chemical. Well, let's have a look at tissue level of studying anatomy and physiology. So tissues are when multiple similar cells come together. Typically, we find them performing a similar function, and often they are found kind of clustered to the same side. Obviously, you will have different tissues and different body parts, though. And there's really four main tissue types that I want us to focus on this level. So we have our epithelial tissues found at the surfaces. They line structures like, for example, I think skin is a really good example of that. We have our connective tissues. So connective tissues, like the name suggests, connect things. These can be tendons, ligaments. So the connections can be physical, or they can even be physiological connections. Blood is a special type of connective tissue. So we're seeing that even though blood doesn't per se form a connection, it transports materials. So it connects in that sense. The third tissue type that I wanted to mention is going to be our muscle tissues. So these are responsible for doing contraction, so creating movement from that. But there's many other purposes that muscles can as well serve. I think a good example would be the heat production that we see when muscles cause us to shiver. So we're trying intentionally to produce that heat. And finally, the final tissue type that I'm introducing here is going to be nervous tissues. These are important for communication, so passing information from different body regions to other, also processing that information. So we've kind of started to do this path of moving from smaller to larger scale of life, larger scale of anatomy and physiology. And then let's take that one step further and have a look at what else we can see. Moving to the organ level, so organs are different types of tissues that come together at the same area to produce a common function. Here, for example, we're seeing a model and we're seeing a liver, for example, on this model. Once we have multiple organs that work closely together, they can form an organ system. I think a digestive tract would be a good example of continuing that liver example that we had. So we're going to have different organs rather than just liver, stomach, small intestines, large intestines. We're going to see pancreas, gallbladder, esophagus, and so on and so on. as we're looking at the digestive system. So systems are formed by organs that work towards the same goal. And finally, we're going to see that organisms are made of many different organ systems, and organisms are these kind of independently living and functioning individuals. So for our purposes, we probably are going to be focusing mainly on humans, human organism, but obviously it is possible that we might venture into some comparative anatomy and physiology. So we might look at other organisms, for example, cats, dogs, horses, and so on, when we are seeing what's similar, what's different in the anatomy. Sometimes it's easier to do comparative anatomy and physiology, especially for our dissections. We'll be using comparable organisms. It's the supply of humans at this level is limited, so for this level of study, so we'll probably rely a lot on animal dissections. So final thing that I want to go through, kind of to wrap up this first part of our lecture content, is to kind of provide an overview of the 11 organ systems that we're going to see in the body. So like we saw earlier on, as organ systems come together, they form the organism. Let's start with the integumentary system. So this includes skin, but also all of the associated structures, glands, hair, nails, and so on and so on. So integumentary system skin especially makes the body waterproof, also cushions and protects deeper tissues. Really important role also of the skin in vitamin D production with the help of the sunlight. We see a lot of excretion happening through the skin, for example, salts. Regulation of body temperature would be another good example. And we see at the skin, also the skin nerve receptors located here as well. So a lot to go through there, and that's going to be one of the very first chapters or first systems that we will be focusing on this course. Moving onwards, let's have a look of the skeletal system. So this is all about the bones. We see that they play a role in movement, storage, cell development at the bone marrow, and so on. So this group is going to be focusing, when we're talking about skeletal system, on the bones, but we'll also address cartilages, ligaments, joints. These provide us muscle attachment points for creating movement. Also, skeletal system is important in protecting vital organs, and we see skeletal system also, especially bones, long bones, as the site of blood cell formation, and also kind of an aspect that often gets overlooked. Bones also play an important role in storing minerals in our body. Onwards to the muscular system, we're obviously talking largely about movement here. So we have different types of muscles. Skeletal muscles are responsible for those, they are those large muscles that we often study at anatomy and physiology courses, responsible for producing those body movements. Smooth muscle, we see a lot of those playing role in forming sphincters, controlling also vessel diameter. And then we have cardiac muscle tissue that's found only within the heart. So we're really seeing, when we're talking about muscular system, a close connection between bones and muscles. It is the muscles that anchor to the bones with the intention of changing the angle at the body part through changing their length. So through this, playing really important part on generating those movements. Next system that I've highlighted here is going to be our nervous system. So really important for communication to central nervous system and away from central nervous system. So these are really fast-acting body's control systems, including brain, spinal cord, nerves, sensory receptors. They respond to internal and external stimuli. and are really responsible for detecting changes. So this would be our sensory receptors. And then these messages get passed to the central nervous system. Central nervous system often assesses information and then based on that activates effectors. So these effectors could be, for example, muscles or glands and so on and so on. Let's have a look of endocrine system a little bit. With the endocrine system, we are talking about hormones. We're talking about different glands, their secretion, how they travel, those hormones, how they act, how they affect their elimination. So hormones really play important in controlling many different processes. Some examples would be, for example, growth, reproduction, use of nutrients, and so on. I have some examples of endocrine glands, and we'll get to dive into more detail of these as we work through our course. But for example, pituitary gland, thyroid, parathyroid glands, adrenal gland, thymus, pancreas, pineal gland, and ovaries and testes would be some of the examples of what we can look at there. Moving onwards, next we have cardiovascular system. So cardiovascular system contains the heart, the blood, and the blood vessels, and many functions that we see relating to the cardiovascular system as well: transportation, protection, control, and so on. So if we want to kind of have a crash course outlook on this, heart is really responsible for pumping vessels where they provide kind of the transport pathway for the blood to and from the tissues. And blood really is important in transportation, especially transporting oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, hormones, and so on. We also see when we talk about the cardiovascular system, kind of the overlap towards the immune system with the white blood cells, an element of the blood, playing an important role in protecting against pathogens, against the body's invaders. Let's have a look at lymphatic and immune systems. I think that lymphatic system is often kind of easy for students to consider, almost like drainage pipes of the house. So kind of complementary system to the cardiovascular system. The immune system largely to do with the body protection. So parts that we're seeing with the lymphatic system: lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, lymphoid organs, complements really the cardiovascular system, whereas lymph nodes and lymphoid organs play important role in cleansing the blood, housing the white blood cell, and this is how we accomplish the immunity, which is going to be something that we'll be spending time talking later on this course. Let's have a look at respiratory system. So getting oxygen in and getting rid of carbon dioxide are the big goals there. Many structures to cover here as well: nasal passages, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs. We saw earlier on that example of the form and function being complementary. So gas exchange takes place at the level of alveoli through those thin walls with the rich pulmonary capillary supply at the lungs. So these air sacs of the lungs allow oxygen to move to the blood and carbon dioxide to be moved to the lungs, to the alveoli, and then breathed away. Next system that I'm highlighting here is our digestive system. So all to do with the food. We're trying to extract energy, nutrients, building blocks for the body, and fiber. Different parts that we're seeing here: so oral cavity, the mouth region, esophagus, stomach, small, large intestines, rectum, accessory organs. Some accessory organs would be, for example, our teeth, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, with the responsibility of breaking down food. Nutrient absorption is an important process that we'll have a look of here, how those get absorbed to the blood, and we're also looking at how we eliminate the non-digestible material. Especially fiber is super important for the functions of the digestive system as we are eliminating that as feces. Next one that I've highlighted here is our urinary system. So again, many different answers depending on who you ask from as for what's the function of the urinary system, but we can consider it here for our purposes as excreting the hydrogen, excess hydrogen from the body. Urinary system plays many important maintenance functions, maintaining fluid balance, maintaining pH, maintaining blood pressure. We're going to see different parts: kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, urethra. Really eliminating those nitrogenous wastes, maintaining the pH balance, and regulating water and electrolyte balance. Water and electrolytes are kind of interconnected, so they go hand in hand. And like I mentioned, maintaining the normal blood pressure. In fact, most blood pressure medications do work through the kidneys. And then what we have left is to look at the final system, so a reproductive system. That's actually the only system that you can perfectly fine live without. Obviously, you won't be producing offspring, but you'll stay alive. For the male, the parts of the reproductive system would include that we'll look at things like testes, scrotum, penis, accessory glands, and duct system. So the sperm is produced at the level of testes, and transportation of the sperm to the external world happens at the level of duct system. For the females, we're looking at things like ovaries, uterine tubes, uterus, and vagina. Remember again, egg production happens at the level of ovaries, and the site for development of the fetus would be then the uterus. However, I do think that while we're looking at this systemic review that we've done, looking at different body systems, it's important to notice that all of these systems do work together. This is the way we choose to teach it, one system at a time, but really there's interactions and a great amount of interactions. So you can't just, I think that it's sometimes hard to get a full idea of the body by just looking at one system. So remember, if something feels challenging at the beginning, probably as we get more systems, it will make more sense. A good example of that is endocrine system. Hormones themselves, just memorizing and going through those might feel like a lot, but when we're able to connect the effects of the hormone, for example, on kidneys at the nephron level, how it alters the distal convoluted tubule, we're able to get much more of an appreciation also of the endocrine system. So hopefully by the end of this course, this all different systems kind of start to come together and you see the holistic view of the body in terms of anatomy and physiology. And that brings us to kind of wrap up this first lecture video. I think that we've done a pretty good job of accomplishing all the goals that we set out in terms of having an overview of the anatomy and physiology, what those terms were, looking at the body, the anatomy and physiology at different levels of structural organization, and we did a brief review of the principal organ systems. And I'm going to wrap up this recording here, and we're going to, in the next recording, go through remaining parts of the chapter 1. Until then, thank you and bye.